Good evening, members of council, members of staff, and observers. I see that we have quorum, and I call this special meeting for the Town of Pelham Council to order. It has been moved by Councillor Junkin, seconded by Councillor Kersey, that be it resolved that the agenda for the October 31st, 2016 special meeting of council be adopted as circulated. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion is carried. The next item is disclosure of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof. That is any conflicts of interest that any members of council may have. Do any councillors have any conflicts they need to disclose?
None, Mr. Mayor.
And there are none, so Mr. Clerk, can you acknowledge that? Mr. Clerk, can you also acknowledge to council why you're the clerk, or that you are the clerk and there is not our normal clerk here?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Sorry, not to say you're abnormal, sir.
You're not normal.
I'm sorry, I'm so used to that, it doesn't even
We
faze
do
me.
not have our clerk or deputy clerk with us.
That's why I'm sitting beside a doctor. The clerk is unfortunately away from the office today, personal matter. The deputy clerk is also away, so they've asked me just to sit in as clerk, so I'll be sitting in, I've been appointed as clerk by Jordan Mamalidi, and I'll just be serving for this one meeting.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. CAO, Mr. Clerk. Thank you. The next item is consideration of bylaws, and there are two. It's been moved by Councillor Kersey, second by Councillor Junkin. Be it resolved, the Council of the Town of Pelham, having given due consideration to the following bylaws, do now read a first, second, and third time to pass the same, and that the mayor and clerk be and are hereby authorized to sign and seal the bylaws. Bylaw 3801, 2006, being a bylaw authorizing the mayor and clerk to enter in an agreement with Fonthill Gardens, Inc. regarding the burying of hydro services, hydro transmission lines, and all other utilities along Regional Road 20 in the East Fonthill development. And bylaw number 2, which is bylaw 3802, being a bylaw authorizing the mayor and clerk to enter into an agreement with Her Majesty the Queen in Right of Ontario, as represented by the Minister of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs under the Ontario Community Infrastructure Fund formula-based component. Questions or comments on any of those bylaws? We do have staff here that if there are questions. Councillor Kersey?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a couple thoughts about approaching the first bylaw with respect to Fonthill Gardens, whether, first of all, we should be doing any discussing in an in-camera situation, given that we're talking about contractual law and agreements that are being negotiated as we speak. So I wondered whether any discussion should move in camera before we carry on with the discussion of that.
Council could move, I guess, to move into closed session regarding, we'd have to do it under the specific provisions of the Municipal Act.
Right.
So it would be for client solicitor privilege or property matters, legal matters.
Right.
Mr. CAO, this is essentially following through on direction that was given.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just comment to the
unless there's an issue that council has, they feel needs to be discussed in camera, the agreement reflects the direction that had been received by council with regards specifically to the arbitration clause. Mm-hmm. Council expressed concern with regards to that. We went back and talked with Fonthill Gardens and quickly rectified that by removing the arbitration piece altogether. So that's the direction I was provided. That's the direction that we've carried through on, and I'm not aware of any other issues with regard to the agreement.
Right.
Thank you. Councillor?
Well, yeah, that's fine. I'm prepared to discuss it in an open session if that's how the rest of council feels. I have no problem with that. I would like, and I'm going to move ahead just on that basis because I don't want to get hung up on technicalities. So I'm going to ask my questions then. I'd like to know what the issue is. We have a draft plan of subdivision that says that the developer is going to bury the services as part of his development agreement with the town, that he's supposed to post 700 and X number of $1,000, $713,000 as security to ensure that that work gets carried on. And so, quite frankly, I don't know what the negotiation is all about. Is it about whether or not he's going to do it, period, or whether or not, or is it around how much money he's going to have to pay? You know, we're signing an agreement to sign an agreement. I'd just like to know what the real issues are. Now that we've boiled it down to, we're going to negotiate, what are we negotiating for? We've provided expert information, both from our solicitor as well as from our hired expert, Watson and Company, with reference to the applicability of DCs towards this work. So what are we negotiating for? That's my first question.
Thank you. Mr. CEO, are you prepared to answer that, or Ms. Weens? Ms. Weens?
We gotta go on camera.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, as I understand it, there are two questions that we've received from Fonthill Gardens solicitor that they're asking for some answers on. And one deals with how was the calculation made with respect to varying the hydro, and that relates to what land is being included. Town-owned lands along the frontage of Highway 20, the lands in front of the stormwater management block, there's Fonthill Gardens lands, and then there are some additional lands being in front of the trap, the dry cleaners, the McDonald's land. So they're asking for some clarification with respect to that calculation. What is their proportionate share? So we're putting that information together. And then they've also asked for whether or not the cost of burying this hydro is going to have any impact on the purchase option and cost sharing agreement that was entered into previously. And so we're going back to those agreements and getting that answered, and we hope to have those questions answered to them this week. That's my understanding of the only two outstanding matters with respect to burying the hydro.
Thank you, Ms. Weens. Counselor?
So, just for clarity, so there is no discussion with reference to the DCs, that's off the table?
I believe it is off the table.
So it's only to determine their proportionate share based on frontage?
And we had, in the subdividers agreement, we had identified that their proportionate share was 36.6%. So they just want to understand how that calculation was made.
I see. And then with reference to their option on the town-owned lands that they have optioned for the medical center and the retirement home.
Yeah, so I think with that would get to the question of, does the cost of burying the hydro across the town's portion of the land equate to part of the cost to service those lands? So that is something that we need to go back and check the language in those agreements and just confirm whether or not that is in there or not. And get back to them.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you for
Okay.
the clarity.
Thank you.
That's great.
Others to that first bylaw? Okay, thank you. Any others to the second bylaw? Ms. Pupo, anything to add to, I know that we're applying for this and
Through you, Mr. Mayor, this is the formula-based funding for the OCIF grant. So this is an annual contribution that we get from them that's formula-based on the town's municipal size per capita and so forth. We did bring forth to council the top-up funding request for Station Street that was submitted on October 21st for a grant. The council is aware, over the next 2 years, we'll get about $550,000 on formula-based funding. The top-up funding, we can only get up to $2 million over 2 years. So if we do receive the Station Street grant, all of the funds that we've received on, including this formula-based, will be used for the Station Street project.
okay, thank you. They kind of give you a little bit. If you get approved on the second round, they include it in that second round piece. So, and that's, the agreement says we have to wait until that. What if we invested on some other type of initiative in the meantime before we hear from that other grant?
We're expected to hear from that grant in early January, February, so we will not assign another project to the formula-based until we know from that if we've got the State Mystery Grant.
Okay, thank you very much, and thanks for letting council know about that. Anything further? So we're ready to call on both bylaws. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion is carried. Thank you. The CAO also added, followed up again on the meeting that we had last week and added the weighted criteria for the 2017 capital budget projects. And I do have a motion here. It's been moved by Councillor Papp, seconded by Councillor Kersey, that council receives and approves the weighted criteria for the 2017 capital projects budget. Mr. CAO, any comments on this, and also how this will be used in the process going forward?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The weighted chart you have in front of you is just the next step from where we left off at the council meeting. Council had indicated the criteria. They had indicated a preference for those criteria. So starting with the most important being the capital plan, and then finally ending with the impact on the debt repayment. So when you put this through the ranking chart, what you end up doing is you can, so if you look at the right hand column, you say A, capital plan, you follow over to the right, and then you'll see an A1 in the next box, in the first box, and then if you go up, you'll see strategic plan. So what it is what's more important, the capital plan or the strategic plan? And council had weighted the capital plan being slightly more important than the strategic plan, so it's assigned an A1. So A is capital plan, and 1 is, as you'll see in the definition, slightly more important. So that's assigned an A1. And then as we went through, you just compare, so strategic plan versus value for money versus community economic impact, etc. And then as you come to the farther right, you'll see the category totals. So those are basically all the A's added up, all the B's added up, and then that's just the total. It equals a total of 86, and then you do the calculation out of 100, so you can arrive at a percentage. So when we're going through the evaluation, when we look at the project or the capital suggestion, the first question is it in the capital plan or not? That is the most criteria. And then as we would go through and score these, then they would be weighted according to the category percentage column, as you see in the ranking. So if council approves this, then we, staff, would take this and we would go through the capital programs in preparation for the budget, using both council's criteria as well as the weighted scores.
Thank you, Mr. CAO. Councillor Ribbiak has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In fact, I have a couple of issues with this thing that I'd like to perhaps
Proceed.
discuss. The first of those has to do with Mr. CAO's description of councils having ranked these things. Now, I don't recall going through any kind of formal process of ranking. Maybe I was asleep. Maybe it was done by email. I'm not sure. I do recall the discussion
CEO's
that we
rating,
had
so,
here.
So we did have
We had a discussion
we had
here.
a chart, and notionally,
Yes.
certain ones were put ahead of others and kind of circled in chunks, and I think that's what the CEO is alluding to.
Yeah, I do recall that discussion, but it has resulted here in this chart in some very
Yes.
specific percentages, and I'm not comfortable that necessarily reflects what we thought, because we hadn't gone through that process. And I guess at a fundamental level, I'm of the view that the weighting of these criteria, first of all, the existence of the criteria, and secondly, the weighting of the criteria ought to be a message that we as council are giving to staff rather than the other way around. So I just wonder whether we might find some way of verifying these scores before accepting them. So that's one issue. The other issue I have is really with respect to which one is it? H, wanted by the community as a criterion. I look at its placement in the chart, and I recognize that there are some significant difficulties that may come out of that thing. First of all, what's wanted by the community is pretty much reflected, I think, in the strategic plan. When we come together to create the strategic plan, the ideas that come forward really are a reflection of what's going on in the community. So putting it in there a second time gives it a weighting that perhaps it doesn't fully deserve, because it's in there twice rather than just once. But second, if we do separate it like that and it ends up being as close to the bottom of the list that's there, it really looks like, how much do we really care what's wanted by the community? And that's completely non-reflective of our view. We have put it in the strat plan. We are aware of the issues and the concerns within the community. That's why the strat plan is there. So having H there at all is something that worries me considerably. So those are my issues, and I don't know if they're at this stage it requires a motion of some kind, but.
Thank you, Councillor. Just to answer that wanted by the community, I think that would be something that's not in the strategic plan and yet wanted by the community. So that's how I would read it. It doesn't say that, but that's how I would read it. I don't know if that helps or not. In terms of the next step, staff were to use this as a rating. And I think Ms. Pupo's indicated that they want to get going on the capital plan so that we can keep the approved budget, and that's why this is here at the special meeting as opposed to waiting until next week. Council can do what council wants, so if you do want us to go through this process, or you want to take a better look at this yourself, or make some changes, we did. Anyways, I'll leave that with you, Councillor. Go ahead.
Well, number one, I'm not sure that it would take longer than 10 to 15 minutes to go through the exercise. And it may turn out to be exactly the same as it is there, but at least it would be then ours, and we could validate it. But the other part, you indicated, Mr. Mayor, that you would apply that only to those projects which come exceptionally, that aren't in the strat plan, that appear from elsewhere. And even under those circumstances, I'm not sure that the weighting then necessarily reflects where it ought to, the amount of attention that ought to be paid to it because it came from the community. I'm just concerned about the fact that it doesn't reflect, certainly in my case, my view of where the importance of what's wanted by the community fits within the grid. And I don't know whether other colleagues feel the same, but those
All
are
right,
my.
let's hear from other colleagues if you want to work on some language as well. Exceptionally wanted by the community or wanted by a special group. I can think of, for example, things like a dog park or a skate park or something like that, where folks have come to us, made a presentation, and it's sort of not added on to the strategic plan, but maybe it's not included in the capital plan, or maybe it's not, so it's kind of additional to the plans. So if council can come up with additional language for that, I understand what you're saying. It does we only care about the community, 2.3% of the time,
Optics are
sort of
pretty
thing,
important, Mr.
right?
Mayor.
So I understand what you're saying. Mr. CEO, and then I'm going to turn to
Mr.
Councilor
Mayor,
Howe.
just to clarify on the process, that the data that was collected during the process with council is exactly what's reflected here. Like, we didn't change anything that was given to us as far as the priorities, the criteria. All we did was fill in the chart, which is simply taking your information, converting it into a mathematical calculation, coming up with the weighting. So we didn't change anything that council had wanted. This is your information. This is your desire. We just filled in the blanks and came up with the criteria. So.
Thank you. Councilor Papp?
Well, okay, so I guess that begs the question, what we have before us then is really our protocol.
That's what you gave us to
This
use.
is what we are going to use, and as part of, and the mathematical calculations is what's going to be part of it. So maybe, I guess for clarification, that picking up on Councilor Bibiak, because unfortunately I came after you guys had been through all of this, and I'd rather not get into the debate, but in fact, what's here and is exactly what we want to see how the process is going to work? Is that what I'm hearing?
So, as the CEO just indicated, what
Yeah.
would happen is a project or projects staff would go through the list of projects, and they would give a weighting from 1 to 10
Right,
on each of the projects.
based on this.
No, just, based on this. Is it in the capital plan, strategic plan, value for money, et cetera?
Right.
And then you apply, and we did this with the location of the fire hall, and I think I spoke about that
Yeah, I
at the
remember,
last
I
meeting.
remember them going through.
So let's say that whatever the ABC project, is within the capital plan, and it's 2 years from now, so you might give it an 8. I don't know what they're gonna use for criteria. Okay, so it's in the capital plan, but not next year, whatever. Then we would say, is it in the strategic plan? Does it meet the strategic guidelines? You'd give it a weighting. Is it value for money? Well, you know what? No, it isn't. It's a bridge that's gonna last forever. So it isn't value for money, so you give it a 0, whatever the criteria is, right? And then they'll compare those projects and say, well, this one got a 56 and this one got an 87, and we only have so much money, so we're gonna take the 87 and not the 56. But the weighting, so it would be, the 0 would get, so it wouldn't get 17 things, it would get 0. So it wouldn't, it'd be 19% would be wiped out. That's how it's done. So you kind of get a score and you compare things. Clear as mud? Councillor King and then Councillor Kersey.
Is it fair to say that it's not necessarily decreasing the importance of the community's input? I think it's more the terminology. Wanted by the community. The community has made suggestions, recommendations, provided some input into what they would like to see. But that's not to take away from what the community wants, but there has to be a higher percentage on something, a project that's related to the strategic plan. It may be an infrastructure issue that has to be addressed, and of course that's going to be much more important than something that's wanted by the community. So I see H not taking away from the community's input, but putting it in perspective in relation to the strategic plan, or whether it's a risk management project. So I think it's just the terminology that needs to be corrected.
Okay.
That's my
I've come up with
suggestion.
something overt community desire.
What the heck?
All right.
No.
Well, then come up with some language if you want to.
Special budget requests.
Special budget requests?
Exactly.
Special community budget requests. As long as it's from the-
Special community requests.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Special community
Community
requests?
I'm
requests.
happy with that.
Special community, that's what you're going to suggest, right?
Yeah. I have a
Okay.
couple questions. So, if I
Yes, go ahead. So if you want to make that amendment when the time is
when we get
appropriate.
there.
Go ahead.
So, first comment, if we drop that wanted by the community altogether and you go back and recalculate the scores, it virtually doesn't change the order of priority. And the percentages, weighting is almost negligible in terms of difference because it's so far down on the scale.
Yeah.
My question was, how are you going to apply the definitive, like when you, let's look at project ABC and you're gonna assign it a score of, if it's gonna be 1 to 10, and then you apply a weighting to come up with the actual. So how are you getting to the actual hard numbers, like from 1 to 10? All right, you understand what I'm asking?
Yes, I'm going to turn to the treasurer does. Madam Treasurer? How do you get to the 1 to the 10 and then before you apply the weighting?
We, well, similar to last year, we used the same type of scale with respect to the evaluation and the criteria. So the directors all sit around the table together and they determine whether, the value for money. We have a huge discussion about where that would sit on a number out of 10. And we provide, or each director has to provide input into that with respect to their own department and how that factors into saying, like, well, we keep using the bridge. I'll use the bridge as an example. So if it's a 100-year bridge and it costs $1 million, where's the value for money? And then they have to convince us as the rest of SMT that is value for money. And we all have that discussion to come up with that exact number that we think, that we all believe that should sit for, with council's values in mind with respect to the strat plan. So, and keeping in mind, I mean, I think on this scale that the debt repayment limit and stuff came to the bottom, but when this happened and it came to at the bottom of the scale, I was fine with that as treasurer because I know as we go through the top portion, all of those factors come into play as you're going through that value for money. Like, is there budget dollars for it? No, there's not. So we come to that conclusion together as a group, and I think that's how most evaluation criteria is done, even when we're doing purchase order or purchase approvals and so forth. So that's the way we did it last year. We're assuming to do it the same way this year with respect to this scale. I hope that helps.
Thank you. Others? So, Councillor Rybak, you said you wanted to go through it. Did you want to go through it, or did you want to, do you accept that? Well, we're going to, I think, change that wanted by the community to special community request. I do have a question if you wanted to go through it, and that is on, sorry, as the CEO was speaking, I thought about this. Under value for money, straight down, it says value for money versus capital plan. And this is exactly the question that Councillor Junkin asked in relation, we keep using the bridge, but there you go, in relation to the bridges versus the culvert. So the capital plan next year calls for an expenditure of $880,000 for a bridge, and the following year, $880,000 for a bridge, and that bridge was $1 million, not 880. Councillor Junkin's question was, is that value for money? According to this, we would say that well, it's in the plan, and that's slightly more important than value for money. So is a plan that we developed a couple of years ago slightly more important than value for money, or is value for money more important than the capital plan? Councillor Junkin, I don't know if you want to speak to that, but you probably say that value for money is more important than the capital plan.
Yeah, I guess. I know there's the discussion here, I guess, is, and we've had this, me and you and a few of the other councillors outside the chamber, was the debate is, should we spend $1 million on a bridge that lasts 100 and, like I asked the construction guy, and he looked at me crazy when I asked him, what's the lifetime of this bridge? And you said it was 125 years, and I think he thought it was probably 150, whatever. 18 inches of concrete, 55 tons of steel. The thing is just, it's a bunker, it's not a bridge, but whatever. So I guess the problem is, you do it once and then it's done, but at the same time, I can look, and I thought that would be the way to go, but at the same time, is it fair that today's taxpayers put that kind of money out for the, so that maybe it isn't the right way. Maybe you do build something that lasts 40 years or 50 years, and then maybe you do that 3 times over the lifetime of the bridge. So at first I thought the bridge was a good idea, but the more I think about it in municipal budgets and what have you, I'm wondering if maybe it isn't better to look at other options. Yeah, so yes, value for money. Probably not, yes.
Thank you. Councillor Kersey to that, then I'll turn to the treasurer.
Well, to my way of thinking, that's where it should be reflected in the capital plan. A really good, solid asset management plan, capital plan should take all of that into consideration when we lay that out. We should say, we're looking to have an asset that's going to last 30 or 35 years, not necessarily an asset that's going to last 150 years. And if that's the type of thinking that went into designing the asset management capital plan, that would be reflected then within that, because that would help in the judgment. And when you look out to say, okay, well, we're quite happy putting in culverts that are going to last 30 years, and they're only going to cost us $225,000, because that allows us to manage our assets better and spread our money around over a bigger pie. That's sort of what I'm thinking, but maybe, I don't know whether our treasurer wants to
Madam
speak to
Treasurer?
that.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. That's exactly the situation that we're in right now, is getting that data into the capital asset management plan, like the replacement data. The problem is what level of replacement do we want to do this at? So the capital asset management plan, from an engineer's perspective, could be that we want to replace it at the 125-year data value. But what we know from our asset management plan that we currently have, that double culverts have been put in. They existed in the town prior to us becoming the town of Pelham. and we have not even replaced all of them. So they are lasting more than 30 years. We know that for a fact. We know that for a fact that they cost less than $100,000 to put in, because we have done some culvert replacement programs. So this is the stuff that we're working on. But I would say that value added won't negate what's in the capital asset management plan, because we don't look at the dollars that's in there, we look at the project. We say, is this project in the capital asset management plan? And if it is, then it gets the weighting based on that. Then we go to the value added section and we say, okay, and we did this last year with the Peace Park, the arches, sorry, in the, out here. There was something that came forward, it was over $100,000, and we knew that was, yeah, it's in the capital asset management plan, but it was not value added for us. We did not have any data to suggest they needed to be replaced and so forth. So we had that fulsome discussion, and we knocked it down to a structural review for less than $10,000. So we will do the same thing with the bridges and look at that kind of stuff, or the road replacements or whatever, and when we get to the value added, we will make sure that we have that discussion to say, is this the best situation for us at the town? So I hope that helps a little bit with that part of it.
That does help, and that helps me in the example that I used to say, yes, that project needs to be done. We know that, we have the engineer's reports, et cetera, et cetera.
At what level?
And at what level is the question. So it's in the capital plan, yes, now then you get down into
And then you
other
say,
things. Okay.
is what,
Yeah.
talking to
Okay,
myself.
well, that's helpful. So what I'd encourage staff to do, the other helpful piece for this is sort of the bus theory, that if we all get hit by the bus tomorrow, what the heck were we talking about when we said this? So it would be helpful to add a little line here in terms of notes to say capital plan, is the project in the capital plan, whatever that is. A little bit of an explanation on each of them, and then as you have the discussion, you can say, well, that's what we meant when we said special community request, instead of what does it mean when you say wanted by the community or whatever. Councillor Papp, and then
No, I just got to add that I agree through you with the treasurer, that's why you have a capital asset management plan. This goes back over the years where things were done for parochial reasons, not for the right reasons. And buildings, roads, et cetera, were pick and chose. So that becomes our moniker from making sure, from liability standpoint, we don't get caught in a situation where we may have it in a plan, but in some cases it may have to be sped up. It all depends. The ultimate is, and I like the explanatory, the ultimate thing though is it's always, and you've heard me say this before, you can change it if you wish. Council has that authority to say at some given point that some other extenuating circumstances occur and you wish to fund or look after that project. But I think what I'd like to see is, you got a list of projects, right? Let's go through the process, see what we come up with, and we'll see whether this works. You can always, it's a flexible type of tool, if you want to call it that. But some things are mandated, you cannot get around it. And I'm looking forward to see when you come back with all of it, what ended up happening.
okay, thank you, Councillor Durley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, it just bothers me a bit if we're going to start underbuilding something, because there certainly are engineering standards that need to be met. And if we underbuild something and a disaster happens, now we're really high on a risk end, and it ends up costing us 5 times than if we had done it right. I just have a concern in that regard. So, I don't know, is there, I'm sure it's investigated as to the benefits of a double culvert over a bridge, but is there an engineering standard or a minimum standard that needs to be met, and should we be seeking something better than just a minimum?
Ms. Pupo?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There's engineering standards, obviously, but there are engineering standards for a double culvert as well. The choice right now with the consultant is to build a 125-year bridge. That is ultimately the consultant's recommendation to us with respect to some of these culverts. However, with the culvert that we had collapsed on Foss Road, I think it was Foss Road or Sumbler Road, a couple of years back.
It was on Chandler.
Chandler. It was replaced by the previous director of Public Works with a double culvert system. We did look into that pricing. It was about $40,000. We're expecting it to last about 30 to 40 years. So it's the lifespan, and what they're suggesting, the consultants are suggesting now, is to extend the lifespan, but they're not taking into consideration how much use is on that bridge, how many people are going across it, and is it valuable to the, what they're looking at is, and I'm, people make fun of accountants, but I'm just gonna make fun of an engineer, but they're looking at, well, we've got to do it this way, and it's the only way because this is what engineers do, and we're gonna build it out to last 125 years without considering what other impacts it has on a municipality with respect to financing, like Councillor Junkin saying, with our ratepayers today paying for the future 125 years out. Because I'm suggesting if that bridge says it's going to last 125 years, it's probably going to last 250, because the culverts that we have mostly in place right now, we can't even find the history before that capital asset management plan came in place and the consultants came in and did the work on them. They can't even find the history for when they were actually installed. So we're assuming, we know that it's way before 1970. So they're lasting well more than 30 years right now for those ones.
Yeah.
Mr. CEO, you want to just add?
Thank you. Just to build on that, category E, safety, security, and risk management, that's where we would also consider those types of things. So if we underbuild, I wouldn't say underbuild, if we use a different methodology and put culverts in, is that going to cause a safety risk management issue? And that's where we would have that discussion as well. So I think it's covered in the criteria.
Okay, good, thank you.
All right, thanks. So do we need a motion to change the wording to, Councillor Kersey had it better than I did, special community request? I think,
Just understood.
I think we should change it if that's.
I
if
think
that's
we
what
should.
we're
The
talking about here.
optics are pretty important.
This is a work in progress. Why would we need a motion for it? Because
We would be approving.
we're
that.
accepting it, okay, right, yeah,
Receive and approve.
right.
Yeah, that's, if you want to just write in, it would be changed to special community requests
Okay.
and then approve the criteria the way it is. That's good. Then we'll change it.
Including adding or special community requests. In place of wanted by the community. Okay. Councillor Ribbiak?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So there's the other question then of whether this chart accurately reflects our view. I'm not convinced that it is. I know it doesn't reflect mine entirely in its completion. I also look at the detail. It indicates the numbers mean slightly more important, reasonably more important, much more important. I don't recall us ever having gone through that discussion. So if the staff are knowledgeable enough of us that they understood that what we meant, then maybe this does reflect what we mean. But I know that I certainly have a question, and if no one else has, that's fine too. But
Thank you, Mr. CEO.
These were the way that this chart is put together, along with the categorization or the scoring of 1 through 3, is not staff's work. It is Ambassador's work. This table and this methodology is right from level 2 creative problem solving training. So it carries on from the exercise you did, and I can provide you the rationale and the explanation from Min's work that we've used to put this together. So it's not something that we arbitrarily decided, oh, we think council is 1, 2, or 3. This is the way that template's set up.
Mm-hmm.
So Councillor, we have two options. We can go through each of the boxes or a box that you have a concern with. Or we could say, you know what, let's give it a try.
well, Mr. Mayor, I'm in the hands of council with respect to this. I've indicated what my concern is. I'm not convinced that this is.
You haven't specifically indicated. The way this works is it D1 or is it D2? And if you or D3 or,
Well, I don't.
E1.
Mr. Mayor, I don't know how it works because we've never gone through this process. So
Therefore, what I'm asking you, Councillor, is if you look at this chart and say, you know what, ease of completion, I think, is way more important than what's marked here. Wanted by the community. I think it should be the other way around. What are the specific ones that you have a challenge with?
Well, to my mind, I think that the capital plan, the strategic plan, could be reversed. or they might even be equal, but I'm not sure I'm happy with with what's there. I've indicated my concern with regard to H, and that concern, by the way, is mitigated. I think that the clarification and in the concept and the title make an awful lot of sense. Beyond that, it's just that there was so much precision with regard to this, and I'm just not at all sure that the nature of our discussion could have resulted in that kind of precise interpretation of what we meant. And maybe Min Baster is absolutely right that there's a process that, based on our discussion in here, this is scientifically proven to be accurate. But man, I'm skeptical. I guess that's really my point. And if I'm the only one with the issue, that's fine. We can live with whatever's there. But
Thank you. Mr. CEO, you want to respond?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The councillor's questions notwithstanding, I can provide the sort of the chapter in the book that goes through how you do it and why you do it this way. So I can provide that information as background. But I think it's more important for council to understand that this is a tool that council is giving to staff, so that we can simply try and prioritize what we're looking at capital-wise, bring it back for council. Council can either accept, change, or deny our recommendations based on what your feelings are. So like, this is only to get us along the way, and if you don't like it, when we bring it back, change it. That's council's prerogative. So this is not anything you're approving that's locked in steel. This is only a tool that you're giving staff in order to come back with a coherent capital budget recommendation, of which you can change.
We probably could have done the whole process in the time that we've discussed whether we should do the whole process or
that
not.
was my
but
point when I started.
Anyways.
I'm good, Mr. Mayor. I'm going
Okay.
to withdraw. I'm not.
So I think the CEO can give that chapter to council. It's an
Yes.
interesting process.
Yeah.
Next time we do this, perhaps we could do it together. It is an interesting process to do, and again, to Councillor Papp, when we worked on the location of fire station number 2, it was is this more important, is that more important, and it's a good process to go through. I think we should, the direction we're gonna go, let's see how it shakes down. Perhaps the rigor of having a 22.1 versus a 22 cause some, it's just the way the numbers are. It's a small number, so maybe that should be removed as well. And Councillor Kersey.
Just a general comment. The only way that this would make a significant change is if you moved something from, say, wanted by the community up above capital plan.
Yeah.
Whether you tweak capital plan versus strategic plan is irrelevant.
Yeah.
When you look at the weightings, they're virtually identical. You can go almost down to community economic impact. Once you get below that, the weightings get less and less and less important. So unless you're willing to raise an issue that you would like to see something significantly higher than its ranking, it really is meaningless. So if you have that, let's hear it so that we can discuss it. I think this reflects what most of us thought it would reflect, but I don't want to speak for everybody. It certainly reflects where I am. If you have anything, Richard, that you feel is significantly out of whack, then let's hear it, because that will change the rankings. But otherwise, it's not going to change the rankings
Yep.
with any great impact.
And
That's all I'm saying.
And just to the first point, the CEO and I did have the discussion. He wanted to rank them something like A0 or whatever. And actually, I challenged and said, you can't have it, even though it says no difference, there is a 0. I think under Min's thing, you need to have the preference. You can't treat them the same, so that's why they're not the same. Ms. Pupo wanted to build on that, and then I'm going to turn to the Councilor Ribbiak, and then we should wrap this up.
Yeah, just to build on it, maybe for comfort level, council approved a 20-year capital, like a 20-year forecast. So 2016 budget was approved to go forward with. 17 is already there, so it's really just reconfirming that those projects are necessary for 2017, and then looking at new projects that might be coming forward from future years and asking why they're coming forward. So I think this analysis is going to do a wonder of suggesting whether those projects need to come forward and then what needs to move out. because we still need to foster it along that debt repayment limit for the next couple of years as well. So I think that would help.
Councillor Ribbiak.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I understand completely that what we're talking about is how sharp the tool should be as opposed to whether the tool should exist or not. And I'm happy that this tool would be adequate in the circumstances. My response was with regard to the absolute precision of those numbers and the recognition on my part that quite possibly, if we'd gone through this exercise, maybe those numbers would be different somewhat, maybe they'd even be in a slightly different order. But the fact of the matter is that in a general sort of way, it's a perfectly good tool, and I'll be happy with it. I'm pleased we made the change in that wording. I'm good.
Okay. Well, maybe we take off the point percentage. Okay.
Someone's spreadsheet had it set up like that, because I had rounded up on my working copy.
Call the question as amended, which includes including adding special community request in place of wanted by the community. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion is carried as amended. Thank you. It's been moved by Councillor Durley, second by Councillor King. Be it resolved, following bylaw be read a first, second, third time and passed. Bylaw 3804 to adopt, ratify, confirm the proceedings of the Council of the Town of Pelham held today on Halloween. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion is carried. And it's been moved by Councillor King, second by Councillor Durley. Be it resolved, special meeting of council be adjourned until the next regular meeting scheduled for next Monday, November 7th, 2016 at 6:30 p.m. Although there will be a special meeting ahead of that. Going to call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion is carried. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween, all.
Gotta go trick-or-treating.
Yes, you may.